The Bulgarians are part of the Slavic ethnolinguistic group as a result of migrations of Slavic tribes to the region since the 6th century AD and the subsequent linguistic assimilation of other populations. The modern Bulgarians and all other South Slavs are characterized by a prevailing genetic substrate that is different than that of the North Slaversus. The two groups are today separated, sharing a modest gene flow. This phenomena of two genetically distinct groups of Slavic peoples is explained by the assimilation of more numerous previous indigenous populations by the medieval Slavic settlers in the Balkans, which forms 55% plus from Bulgarian genetic legacy today, that is predominantly Eastern Mediterranean, i.e., Greek, Cypriote and Levantine-like. Genetic admixture analyses estimate that the genes of the Bulgarians of northeastern European donor group are over 40% of the total, which is related to Slavic settlement in the area, as its frequency was obtained at least for the most part during a single admixture event. This is a higher estimate as in the case a Balto-Slavic group in the broad sense is considered. For the Bulgarians, a Lithuanian-like admixture is estimated at 23.2% and a Polish-like admixture at 19.3%, the latter of which can be considered a lower estimate of the remaining genetic legacy of the Slavic donor tribes into the modern Bulgarians. The western and southernmost Balkans was settled with Sclavony, the east with Antes. Genetically and linguistically, the Slavic ancestors of the modern South Slavs had divided mainly into two groups, each of which took a migration stream either through the west or the east of the Carpathian Mountains. Haplogroup R1a, the major haplogroup among Slavic tribes, reveals that the haplogroup of the Serbo-Croat group is mainly constituted by R1a L1280 or R1a CTS3402, while the Bulgaro-Macedonian is exclusively made up of the R1a L1029, which homogeneity suggests migration from compact areas. Linguistic evidence backs similar division of Western and Eastern South Slavic, further showing that the Eastern South Slavic group demonstrates closer affinity and some irreplaceable key features present only in the Lechitic dialects. Around 4% of Bulgarian genes are either a result of migrating donor tribes outside of Europe and the Middle East or are of undetermined origin, of which 2.3% are from Northeast Asia and correspond to Asian tribes such as Bulgars. The Bulgarians, the Hungarians is another example of name, as and all other Eastern Europeans have similar low genetic substrate of recent East Asian origin. The percentage, however, may vary by regions, as the less numerous Bulgars were concentrated around the northeast, failing to settle throughout the country numerous tribes as the significant donor tribes. Y-DNA, Bulgarians, as the neighbors, show the highest diversity of haplogroups in Europe, marked by significant frequencies of 5 major haplogroups. Most Bulgarians belong to 3 unrelated haplogroups, 20% of whom to IM423, 18% to EV13 and 17.5% to RM17. But the biggest part belongs to Haplogroup R. The major haplogroups, grouped by age of around 20 KY, are Haplogroup IL460 is presented at levels tilde 22% according to 808 Bulgarian male samples of the largest scale study from 2013. By higher levels are defined the profiles of Ukrainians and all South Slavs other than Bulgarians. Evidence points to European origin for macrohaplogroup R and Levantine for its immediate ancestor IJ. Its exclusive and now patchy distribution within Europe suggested a very early entry into Europe during Paleolithic colonization, which was confirmed by the lack of its ancient DNA R1a outside of the continent until the 13,000 years old European Cro-Magnon remains belonging to I2a. It resulted to be the dominant haplogroup in the former Sofia city, Sofia, Plovdiv and Varna province. Bulgarian HGI2a most often belongs specifically to the P37.2 M423 branch, representing 20% of Bulgarian males. According to some data, Bulgarian males who belong to M423 belong to CTS1022A Dinaric, the prevalent clade in Eastern Europe, and none of them belongs to the Diels L161 branch of the CTS 595 branch found in West Europe and Sardinia. The Dinaric is descended by several only child subclades, and it is suggested that its most recent common ancestor is aged only 2,200 years, making it the youngest and most common microgroup. It makes up an absolute majority among the highest populations. The largest macrogroup among Bulgarians is Dinaric North. The largest SNP group is Z17855, being the prevailing clade in the Eastern Balkans and rare elsewhere. Second major part are representatives of Dinaric South S17250+, which is the most common subclade among West Balkan peoples. The clades Dinaric North S17250+ and Y4460+ that are traditional for the North Slavic peoples are also represented at low levels. These SNP groups separated before the Slavic expansion in the Balkans. Thus, the highest frequency of I2a that is observed in the Balkans today was present before the expansion and is owed to indigenous tribes, in particular Thracians for Romania and the region. Initially a Holocene expansion of I2a in southeastern Europe is supposed. However, the homogeneity of Balkan HGI2 and its star-like clustering suggests a far more recent expansion time. Around 2% of Bulgarian males belong to the subclade M223 found mostly around Germany. I2a2 is the most frequent haplogroup of European male remains dated to the Metal Ages, while I2a1 and I2a1b are most common on Mesolithic remains. As such, they were the primary haplogroups of prehistoric European hunter-gatherers. Haplogroup EV68 is presented at levels (19.5%). The ultimate origin of EV68 points to northeastern Africa, specifically near the Nile and Lake Alexandria. Thus, this haplogroup represents a more recent Bronze Age out of Africa movement into Europe via the Balkans. The macro haplogroup E still prevails in most of the African continent, but through the long-term migrations the sub-Saharan maternal lineage HGL was lost, lacking completely in the Balkans. Holocene movement into the Near East is proposed then several thousand years ago, a movement into the Balkans. All V68 positive Bulgarians belong to its M78 subclade, which is the prevailing haplogroup in most of Northeast Africa and around the Balkans. The presently mostly European V13 originated in Western Asia according to the most plausible scenario and is presented at 18% among Bulgarian males. It resulted to be the dominant haplogroup in the former Lovech, Haskovo and Razgrad province. According to deeply traced data, its internal structure is divided among Z5016, Z5017 and S7461. Recent findings of V13 in a Neolithic context in Iberia give a terminus anti-QUEM. However, it might have really begun to expand in the Balkans somewhat later, perhaps during the population growth of the Bronze Age. Like IP37 above, it is rather limited throughout Europe but peaks in the Balkans only for the Albanians, Greeks, Macedonians, Macedonian Romani, Montenegrins, Serbs and Romanians are recorded higher levels than Bulgarians. It is largely autochthonous. Haplogroup RM420 is identified at 17.5%. It is the dominant group among the North Slavs, Slovenians, Hungarians and the most common haplogroup in Asia. After over 60 Bulgarian R1a carriers had been studied, it was revealed that the R1a branch Z282 that is limited to Europe and separated from their Asian relative 5,000 years ago, make up 97% of Bulgarian R1a, while the most common branch from China to Anatolia makes up the rest 3%, divided by the largest branches. The Bulgarian R1a structure will be nearest to the Estonian by composition, as the M458 branch outnumbers the other Eastern European branch Z280, while no West European subclade from the Z284 branch was detected. As such, the R1a frequency may only be the result of ultimate descendants of ancient Eastern European tribes, namely Balto-Slavs such as early Slavs and Thracians. The M458 branch is the prevailing among Bulgarians at 7.5%, which is the most common clade in the Czech Republic, most of Poland, Bulgaria and Albania, and minor parts of Greece, Germany, Slovakia, Ukraine, Belarus, the Netherlands and Russia. The branch Z280 is consistently outnumbered by M458 throughout whole eastern and central Bulgaria. M458 is the dominant R1a clade in the regions roughly corresponding to the area of Bulgarian dialects that share most similarities with Polish dialects, the Eastern dialects and the Slavic dialects in Greece. R1a with a prevailing M458 component makes up the majority in the former Haskovo province, while in the former Montana province it is dominant with dominant Z280 component. Deeply traced data reveals that 90% of the sampled Bulgarian carriers of the M458 clade are carriers of the L1029 microclade, which is 2–3,000 years old, and definitely the most common clade in most of the Eastern Balkans, various spaced parts of Poland, the Czech Republic, Ukraine, Belarus, Slovakia, Hungary, Austria, Germany, Switzerland, Sweden, France, Benelux, Denmark, Lithuania, Sweden and Italy. The Z282* component of the Bulgarians is also much lower than that of the East Slaversus. A fact is that the early habitat of the mentioned Slavic tribes by the ancient authors, that of said to have partially moved to Bulgaria, was described as being in present Ukraine and Belarus. Many of the tribes that were Lekites, as were the Slavic tribes that settled in Bulgaria by the linguistic traits, moreover today backed by genetic traits. The occasional prevalence of the M458 clade in other Slavic than Western countries is traced to historical Lekites, as in the case of Radimich, Polans and Viatici, which were assimilated by later East Slavic tribes. Although Lekitic language is now gone from this area, a genetic offshoot still remains in the Chernigov, Polsy and northern Dnieper areas, which today are the only areas in Belarus and Ukraine where M458 is occasionally the prevailing clade. As well, its microclade L1029. A solid genetic evidence for that the haplogroup R1a of the Bulgarians is for the most part descended from Slavs, rather than Thracians, and exactly from the Polsy area, is that the L1029 clade among Bulgarians is carried by half the Bulgarian carriers of R1a, and in the case is entirely constituted of two 2,000 years old subclades YP417 and YP263, which in turn make up the same majority in several northeastern European countries. As among Bulgarians, the YP417 clade constitutes the absolute majority of L1029 clade of the sampled people from Belarus, Ukraine and Russia. But in contrast, in Poland these are not the most common detected clades of L1029. Haplogroup RM343, present in Bulgarians at 11%. R1b is the most frequently occurring haplogroup around Ural and Chad, in most of Western Europe and the adjacent islands. The Bulgarian internal structure is heterogeneous and 4% of Bulgarian males carry Western European subclades. At least 2% are carriers of the Italo-Celtic branch U152. Another 1% belongs to the U106 branch that corresponds with the spread of Germanic peoples. The ancestral L23 and Z2103 branch show a clear relationship with Anatolia and the Near East. The branch turned to be the dominant clade of the Yama culture in Far Eastern Europe. In addition to the Middle East, it is currently the dominant clade of R1b there in parts of Central and East Europe. Most Bulgarians belong to the branch. The majority of them belong to its subclade Z2110, which today is likely limited only around Europe. The overall evidence suggests that the macro-haplogroup R arose in southern Central Asia descending from Haplogroup IJK. The subsequent path into Europe, and the major settlement is thought to have happened in the Bronze Age by the Kurgan hypothesis. R1 clades are found at minority levels in Europe since the Mesolithic. A subsequent Balkan entry of R1b into Europe is a major theory. Haplogroup JM172 is presented at levels 10.5%. Higher levels of it are observed in the Balkans as far as Bosniaks, Italians, while Anatolia and the surroundings are dominated by the group, whilst its origin is North Levantine. Its current pattern reflects more recent events connecting the Aegean and Western Anatolia during the Copper and Bronze Ages, as well as Greek and Phoenician colonization around the Mediterranean. Several subclades within J2 are present. JM410 is represented at 6% and JM12 at 4%. The prevailing is the L26 deep subclade of J2. It is further divided into M67, M92, L24 and other clades. Finally, there are also some other Y-DNA haplogroups presented at lower levels among Bulgarians, 20% altogether, as GP15 at 5%, IM253 at 4%, of which mostly Scandinavian L22, Jutlandian Z58 and continental Z63, JM267 at 3.5%, EM34 at 2%, TM70 at 1.5%. At less than 1% haplogroup CM217, HM82, NM231, QM242, LM61, IM170, EM96, EXCL. M35, RM124, EM81, EM35. The overall profile of 808 Bulgarian samples, according to the highest level of phylogenetic analysis calculating distribution of HGS R1a, 1a7, R11, R1b, 1a2, R2a, i.e.1b1, E1b1b1, E1b1b1, E1b1b1b, J2b, J2a, J2a1b, J1, G, T, No, CH, Q, L, A and B, is positioned nearest to the Romanians per 147 the samples, also backed by studies as early as 2000. However, the analysis of the Bulgarian study showed inaccuracy in some aspects using population datasets, which proved to contain genetic drift according to alternative, more extensive studies on these populations. Furthermore, the analysis did not even involve the populations Macedonians, Serbians, Montenegrins and Slovaks. The study of the 149 Romanians by whose data they came out about most proximal to Bulgarians concludes that Romanians are closer to Ukrainians and Hungarians than to the Bulgarian group sampled by the study. Bulgarians are situated nearer to populations such as Berbers and Sudanese than to Turks and Poles, which proximity also applies for nearby populations to Bulgarians that were under Ottoman Turkish rule for centuries. This situation would not be the same if the analysis calculates distance by considering more recent subclades, e.g. EV13 instead of EM78. Similarly, Y-DNA analyses of distribution of haplogroups of pre-Holocene age determine Norwegians and Sardinians more proximal to Bulgarians than Poles and Russians. Some Central Europeans are situated very distant per data of the phylogenetic Bulgarian study because of scarce datasets containing remarkable genetic drift. For most compared European peoples, datasets were taken from Battaglia, which does not involve more than 100 samples per population. Many large-scale studies refuted the frequencies from the datasets of Battaglia as inaccurate, determining that the observed frequency of R1a of Battaglia among Hungarians was the result of exceptionally strong genetic drift due to only 53 samples taken, and this extended a lot their genetic distance against Bulgarians, who according to the most extensive data so far are actually the most proximal Europeans to the Hungarians. The largest scale study of the Hungarians determined that their R1a frequency is only 26%. It determined that the remaining Finno-Ugric peoples are genetically the furthest populations, and clearly confirmed that the closest Europeans to the Hungarians are the Bulgarians. However, the same study determines the Yugoslavs as the nearest population to Bulgarians. Similarly, some reckoned that the contribution of Bulgars to the modern Bulgarian genetic pool is hardly recognizable. It is unclear why the extensive datasets and the most proximal Slavic populations to the Bulgarians were excluded from the phylogenetic analysis of the Bulgarian study selectively. According to DNA data for 17 Y chromosomal street loci in Macedonians, the Macedonian population has the lowest genetic distance against the Bulgarian population. Other Y-DNA studies considered the Bulgarians closest either to Macedonians, Serbs, Bulgarian Turks or Gagauzes, followed either by some of these or by Romanians or Bosniaks. A phylogenetic analysis determines that the population of Haskovo province has shorter genetic distance against the population of the Czech Republic than to the Bulgarian provinces, and that only the population of Burgas province is closer to Haskovo than the Hungarian population. Furthermore, only datasets of two more Balkan or Slavic foreign populations are used, and all other Slavic populations are excluded from this analysis. According to an older study of 127 Bulgarian males, frequencies of the following: 30% are 27.5% on 20% T, 18% J, 1.5% G, 1.5% H, 1% T. According to another study involving 126 Bulgarian males, frequencies of the following: 30% I, 25% E, 17.5% R, 17.5% J, 5.5% G, 4% Q, 1% L, 1% T, unknown 3%. According to another study involving 100 Bulgarian males, frequencies of the following: 34% I, 30% R, 21% E, 9% J, 2% G, 2% T, 1% N. mtDNA. Complementary evidence exists from mtDNA data. Bulgaria shows a very similar profile to other European countries, dominated by mitochondrial haplogroups HGH, HGU, HGJ, HGT, and HGK. Like most Europeans, H1 is the prevailing subclade among Bulgarians. Most of the eukaryotes belong to U5 and U4. The subclades of haplogroup H may have not been studied, but subclusters H1b and H2 are more common in Eastern than in Western Europeans. Recent studies show greater diversity within Mount haplogroups than once thought, as subhaplogroups are being discovered, and often separate migrations and distributions of the Y-DNA haplogroups. While the Y-DNA variation in Europe is clinal, the mitochondrial is not. The results of the mitochondrial analyses find the Bulgarians more related to North Slaversus. The general mtDNA analyses of the study find the Bulgarians in a cluster with Central Europeans, but others find them more related to Balkan peoples, or to both at the same time. According to the largest-scale mtDNA Bulgarian study involving 996 Bulgarian samples, comparing distribution of HGSH, H5, HV, HV0, R0a, J, U1, U2, U2e, U3, U4, U5a, U5b, U6, U7, U8, KN1, N2, XM1, 2. The Bulgarians came out nearest to the Poles, followed by Ukrainians, Croats, Czechs, while neighboring Turks, Romanians and Greeks remained very distant. Several other pan-European analyses of the same Bulgarian samples indicate that the neighboring populations except the Macedonians are distant from the Bulgarians. According to these, the Bulgarians are at minimal distance by mtDNA either to Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, or to Macedonians, followed either by Ukrainians, Croats, or Czechs, while neighboring populations such as Turks, Romanians, Serbs, and Greeks remain more distanced. Italians also remain related according to these studies. According to another analysis, Bulgarians, despite being part of a Slavic mitochondrial cluster, are most related to Romanians, followed by Hungarians and Czechs, but distant to Balkan Albanians and Bosniaks. It was also found out that Bulgarians are very distant to all Asian and African populations, but at least distanced by mtDNA to the Arkhangelsk Oblast in Russia, where also Y-DNA HGI2 prevails. A more recent pan-Slavic mtDNA plot analyzing genetic distance situates Bulgarians as sharing the position with Czechs, Romanians, Macedonians and Hungarians, while other close groups to them are Slovaks, Estonians and Latvians. Others determined Albanians and Portuguese as most related to Bulgarians. Others determined Northern Europeans and Slavs. Others Israeli. However, some of these analyses depend on minimal variance that changes the proximal distance. Other studies consider the Bulgarians closest to Romanians, followed by Italians and Iberians, while Poles, Slovaks, and Czechs are determined more distanced. This innovatively considered the Latin peoples at short genetic distance, which has never been confirmed with Y-DNA. It should noted none of the analyses on genetic distance compares the subclades of haplogroup H except for H5 due to lacking data. However, the structure of the haplogroup of some Central European, Balkan and other peoples may be similar to the Bulgarian, at least by division of older subclades of haplogroup H. mtDNA haplogroups of ~1000 Bulgarians, HV 49% H41%, H5 3%, HV4%, HV0 4%, U18%, U1 1%, U2E 1%, U3 2%, U4 4%, U5 8%, U5A 5%, U5B 3%, U6 0%, U7 1%, U8 and LT 1%, JT 18%, K 6%, N 5%, N1 3%, N2 2%, X 2%, M 1%, L and LT 1%, R0A and LT 1%, others and LT 1%.